Wow, this is good. Full house. Thank you so much to everyone for coming. Nice to see so many familiar faces and new faces. For those that don't know Apadmi is 250 people. We make digital products, 200 of us around here, a few more scattered in Edinburgh, and now 30 in Amsterdam. My name's Marcus Hadfield. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer. And one of the things that I get asked a lot in my job is what's coming next. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So we've got a brilliant panel. We've got Stu Jones, Head of Digital Products at Domino's. We've got Phil Neilson. Phil, I'm going to mangle this, but Head of Emerging Technology and Experience at Barnardo's, and Denise, Head of Digital Experience at TalkTalk, Denise Maskew. And Tom Cheesewright, Applied Futurist, is going to kick off telling us, well, about the future. Before I hand over to Tom, though, I want to ask you a quick question about film. Who's seen Bill and Ted's Remarkable Adventure? Excellent adventure. And who knows what's remarkable about it? All right, okay, so it's filmed in 1989. And according to this book, which is brilliant, it's the last film that paints a positive future. It's the last film that goes into the future and says the future's better than it is now. Ever since then, Hollywood's painted like dystopian nightmares of bleakness. And why is that important? Is because if you don't think of a positive future, you don't get a positive future. And I think that's how I'd like to hand over to Tom. Before I do, just in case you're wondering what a positive future looks like, according to Bill and Ted, just like now, but with better water slides. Tom.
Thanks, Marcus. I shall try not to scare everybody with a picture of a dystopian future. That's not my objective for today. My objective for today is to get you just to think about the future at all. And I'm going to throw a bit of reverse psychology at you now. I'm going to tell you that most of you are not going to follow the advice that I give you. And I know this from sort of hard-won experience over the last decade as a full-time futurist. That's what I do. I do nothing else. I am a futurist. And what it means is I work with organisations around the world to try to help them to answer three questions. First of all, what does our future look like? And sometimes that's the near future, sometimes that's the far future. And once we've done that, they say, well, actually, can you help us tell that story? It's no good having a vision of the future if we can't communicate it to our staff about what's coming for them, or to our customers about what they can expect from us, or to our shareholders about why they need to throw more money at us. And then we've done that, we've communicated this story, and everybody's fired up, and they come to me with a third question, which is, great, what do we do about it? And that's why I call myself an applied futurist, because I get involved in the solutions as well as pointing out problems. And what I generally find is that I get asked to do the thinking. I get asked to do the thinking about the future. Can you go away and can you come back to us with a vision of the future? And I don't think that's very sustainable. And very quickly, once I started doing this full time, I love that job. I love doing that. I love a completely new organisation coming to me and saying, could you help us think about the future of X? And, clanging name drops. I did my first work for NASA last night, thinking about the future of cities for NASA. I've been working with people like Pepsi and Mars recently, thinking about the future of products for them. But what I'd really like and what will be my mission as a futurist, and has been for a few years and will be for the remainder of my time as a futurist until I retire, will be to train more futurists. Because I think futurism, I think the skill of looking at the future and seeing what's next is absolutely critical for anybody with any level of leadership in business. And yet we're absolutely terrible at it. We don't devote the time to it. We don't have the skills or the practices to do it. And we don't value it enough. And when we do it, we don't listen to the results. So what I wanted to talk about for about 20 minutes this morning is three things. First of all, why do we look at the future? Why should we look at the future more, and why don't we? Secondly, how do you look at the future? I can't teach you everything in 5 minutes, but I'll give you some clues as to how you look at the future at different timescales. And then finally, if I haven't talked for way too long, I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that are really catching my clients' attention now, the sorts of things I'm talking to those big brands about, that they're asking about, that might spark conversations in your organisations. That sound all right? Nods, I'll take that. So first of all, why do we look at the future? And you think that's kind of obvious, right? We're all in business, we all have ambitions, we all want to go certain places in our careers or with our organisations. So we've got to think about the future, right? We've got to plan, we've got to get a sense of where we want to be. You'd think that was obvious, and yet, when I'm working with a new client, and when I'm training them particularly, I set them a challenge. I say, can you carve out 1% of your time to focus on the future? 1% of your time, which translates to roughly 1 day every 6 months, where you clear your diary, where you have no meetings, answer no emails, don't respond to the phone, just focus exclusively on what's coming next, whether that's the next 2 years or the next 20. And their initial response is always, yeah, I can do that 1 day every 6 months, that's fine. And you ask them in 6 months whether they found a day. Oh no, this came up, that came up, I got sucked into this firefight, this client had a problem, this customer had a problem, but I'll do it in the next 6 months. 6 months pass, have they done it? No. We think we're going to think about the future, but actually carving out the time to do it is really hard because we don't prioritise it. And actually our organisations don't prioritise it. I spoke to the head of a massive training provider the other day, a company that sells training courses into some of the biggest companies in the UK and in the world, FTSE 100s, Global 500s. And I talked to him about what the demand is. What do they want to teach their new grads? What do they want to teach their executives? And where does foresight and strategic thinking sit in that list? And the answer, by and large, was it's not in that list. They don't have any courses on foresight and how to think about the future because no one asks them to train people in it. It's not valued. What's the one exercise that every organisation does every year to plan for the future? Hands up, anyone? The annual budget. The annual budget. You've got to do it. If you're a listed company, if you're doing your accounts, you've got to do a budget, right? If you're of any sort of scale. And if you're above a certain size, if you've got shareholders, you've got to do a strategy as well. This is our annual strategy, announces the CEO. This is the direction we're taking. And the CFO puts the budget together. In 2/3 of companies, the annual strategy says we're going this way, and the budget says we're going that way. They're either not aligned at all or only aligned at the highest level. So we don't spend time to think about the future. We don't carve out that time. We don't value it. And the one time every year that we do it wrong. Now, why is this a problem? Why is it particularly a problem now? A few years ago, I wrote a book called High Frequency Change. I don't expect any of you to have read it, but it'd be nice if you had. And the premise of this was that change isn't necessarily happening faster now. Not across the board. It would be stupid of me to say change everywhere is happening faster when I live in a 150-year-old house and drive a 20-year-old car. Lots of things stay the same for a very long time. Has anyone seen a really innovative toilet recently? They look basically the same as they did 400 years ago. Beds the same, baths the same, showers the same. Not everything changes faster. But technology, and particularly the type of technology that's developed in places like this, strips friction from a lot of progress. It's much easier to move products, services, ideas, memes, media around the world now than it was before. And so a lot of the things that we interact with day to day, not the big stuff like houses necessarily, but the little stuff like TV programs and news stories and music, all of that turns over much faster than it did. Those types of products affect a lot of the businesses we're in. It's much easier to start a new company than it was 20 years ago. When I started my first business, it took 6 weeks to get a bank account. It took 2 weeks in the assistance of my accountant just to get registered with Companies House. All my accounts had to be on paper and typed into a spreadsheet because things like Xero didn't exist. You can start a business on your sofa with a glass of wine in your hand in about half an hour now. It's very dangerous. It's like the next level on from drunken eBay shopping. You wake up in the morning, you've accidentally registered a domain name, set up a website, and ordered a container full of stuff from China. We've stripped a lot of the friction away from your business. That brings new competition. That brings new challenges. It brings new things that can wipe your business out. And all that time that you're focused on the day-to-day, the firefighting, quite often optimization. How do I make my business bigger? The business it is today, just bigger. How do I make it the business it is today, but more profitable? All the time we're focused on that, which is 99% of our time, 100% of our time if it turns out, based on the people I speak to. All the time we're doing that, all we're doing is accelerating our business towards an eventual brick wall that we don't see coming. And the speed at which we're heading towards it is getting faster because of this lowering of friction that brings in new competition, new challenges, and new opportunities that we might miss. I often use the analogy of driving. It's like driving a car. One of the first things you learn when you're learning to drive, belatedly in some cases, is that the faster you're travelling, the further you have to look ahead, because it takes you longer to brake and longer to steer around things. We're all in a car now where the accelerator's kind of stuck down. And so the only way we're going to avoid stuff is by looking further ahead and building the skills of foresight and strategy. So that's why we look at the future and why we often don't. So how do you do it? Well, this is going to be a very potted introduction to the tools of futurism. But really, I tend to think of the future in kind of like two speeds, two ranges. You can be very specific about this: first horizon, second horizon, third horizon. But let's think long-term and short-term. Long-term, 5 years plus. Short-term, the next sort of 18 months to 2 years, maybe 5 years. And again, best explained with an analogy. Imagine you are the chief of a nomadic tribe, and your tribe is your organization. And you are trying to guide them to the most appropriate places to be as the seasons change. And you do your long-term foresight. You think, okay, I know that when the snows come, we need to be down in the valley where the grasses are and where there's water for our cattle. I've got this long-term vision. I can scan out different valleys. I can choose which one's most appropriate, but my long-term vision is we've got to get the tribe to that valley 20 miles away with all our cattle by next summer, or by next winter. And that's great. You've got this long-term vision. You've scanned out all the different scenarios there might be. You've picked one. You've set your direction. The problem is there's lots of obstacles between you and that valley. How are you going to get there without all your cattle starving or dying of thirst? Well, we've got to find oases on the way. How are you going to avoid the bandits that want to steal all your cattle on the way over there? We've got to scout for potential threats. Are you going to find some resources on the way that are going to make life in that valley even better? You've got to scan the horizon looking for opportunities. And so as the chief of this tribe, as the leader of an organization, whether that organization is you, your team of 5 people, your division of 500, or your entire organization, you've got to think about the future at 2 different speeds, at 2 different levels. You've got to be thinking, what's our vision? What are the different possibilities that might come? Which one do we want to head for? And what do we have to do in order to get there? But you've also got to be scanning the near horizon and thinking, what are the threats and opportunities along the way? Where are those oases? Where are those bandits? And when I started out as a futurist, I thought all my work was going to be jetpacks and flying cars and rocket ships and space travel, the far distant future. And actually I found out very quickly that what a lot of my clients wanted was the near term. They wanted to know where the bandits were. They didn't want to be another insert cliche, blockbuster. taken out at the knees by something they didn't see coming. They wanted to avoid those threats. And what I found was there aren't actually particularly good tools for looking at the near future. If you want to look at the far future, years of development, decades of development, very well worked out tools like causal layered analysis and scenario planning, which a lot of you may have experienced before, where you literally say, okay, what are the big drivers of change going to be? Can we create a series of stories about what happens if those drivers are at one end or other of their spectrum? If the economy's great or the economy's terrible, if immigration's high, if immigration's low, if climate change effects are really huge or not, if climate policy is really green or really growth focused. You can square that circle. And you generally plot out 4, 5, 6 stories and tell stories about those different possible scenarios and then work back from there. What are we going to do about it? And that's your long-term future. That's the sort of exercise I helped Greater Manchester Combined Authority do when they were thinking about the future transport strategy for the city. That exercise took months. It involved a load of people, probably as many people as in this room over the course of that 6 to 9 months. If I hadn't been doing it at an absurdly low rate, it would have been a very expensive exercise. That's not very good if you're trying to look at something that might happen within a year or 2 years. You can't spend 9 months thinking about something that's going to take you out at the knees next year, because it's already happened. So you need a different tool set for looking at the near future. And that's when we use this thing called intersections. And intersections is a very simple tool. I've heard it described as a SWOT analysis on steroids. It says the near future, the big changes in the near future are defined by the intersection of 2 things. 1, what are the pressures that we can see and feel today that are already driving behaviour change? The economy, lack of liquidity, shortage of skills, ageing infrastructure, the things that are affecting our business, our customers right now that we know are there. And I say we know, you quite often don't. It's very funny when you go into a company and say, what are the big issues for you today? And you ask the chief exec, you ask somebody in the middle of the company, you ask somebody on the shop floor, and they all give you completely different answers. But you collect those pressures, you go and talk to people in your organisation, you ask them really simple questions like, what's pissing you off? And you get some really interesting answers. Ask your customers that as well. Get a couple of drinks in them first, but do ask them. And then you go and look for the trends. This is what you do on your day out every 6 months, focused on the future. You spend the morning talking to your colleagues, talking to your peers, maybe running an email survey across the company and ask them questions like, what winds you up? What slows you down? What gets in the way? What do you think keeps the chief exec up at night? And then you spend the afternoon going, okay, what's happening in industries that look a bit like ours that's not happening here yet? If I'm in law, what's happening in accounting? If I'm selling widgets, what's happening in people selling digital media? And you say, is that portable? Could that come to me? You look at what's happening in China or Korea or Vietnam or bits of Europe that might be portable to your location. You look at where all the venture capital is going at the moment. What are the next technologies going to be that's really interesting? You look at what the big tech firms are doing, and are they about to jump into my market? And at the end of the day, you make yourself a fresh cup of coffee, and you say, here are my pressures, here are my trends. How do they intersect? We've got a massive issue with skills in digital. We've got this incredible trend of computers that write code. Are the two going to intersect? Is one going to offset the other? Is it going to create a bigger pressure? Is it going to reduce the pressure? Can we leverage it? Is it going to cause us problems? What do we do? And you end up with a list of where these things connect. Some of them don't connect at all. They make no sense at all. And then you take that list and you prioritize it. And you ignore anything that isn't going to double or halve the size of your business. Just focus on the absolute biggest ones, 2 or 3, and you put them on your to-do list in the column that I call existential. I've got my urgent, I've got my important, and I've got my existential stuff I absolutely have to deal with. And you repeat that process after 6 months. So what sort of stuff is going in that column right now for my clients? Climate change, obviously, but that's very macro. It's only when you start to zoom into the micro that you really understand the impact. One of my clients is the biggest producer of almonds in the world. They're literally the entire almond, it's about 80% of the global almond industry, because the California almond producers. Climate change has a very specific impact for them. The availability of water, what's production rates going to be like, what's price going to be like. Got other clients who make big food brands. Their raw materials prices spiked during the Ukraine war because we couldn't get wheat out of Eastern Europe, which is about 30% of global wheat production. Climate change, yes, big macro. We all have it in our heads. It's up here somewhere. We know it's a problem. Zoom in. Zoom into your particular industry and how it's going to affect you. How's it going to affect your supply chain? How's it going to affect energy costs? How's it going to affect logistics and distribution costs? How's it going to affect your staff? How's it going to affect your customers? Second one, demographics. Again, aging population. How many times have we heard the phrase, the aging population? Billions. What happens when you zoom in? Two things. Parts of the UK, within a decade, are going to have 1 in 3 people over the age of 65. 1/3 of the population over working age in parts of the UK within 10 years. By the second half of the century, it's going to be half. Half the population in some parts of the UK, particularly in the southwest, beyond working age. And well, we'll have put the retirement age up by then, but nonetheless. How do you staff the care homes? How do you staff the hospitals? How do you staff the farms? How do you staff the hotels and the restaurants that are the lifeblood of industry around there? And then go back to the earlier stage of life. Because while the population's aging, we're all living longer, healthier lives, right back at the start, the major milestones of adulthood have been shunted back. And lots of people in this room will recognise this, either because it's them or it's their children. The average age at which we now learn to drive was 26 pre-pandemic. It's not 18 anymore. I suspect it's probably close to 30 now because of all the delays and lots of people deciding they just don't need to. The average age at which people get married, first time, well into their 30s. 40s, I think, for homosexual couples. Average age at which people have children, shunting back towards sort of 35, even beyond. There's this whole new period that I call extended adolescence, where the major markers of adulthood that your parents considered as being really important in their early 20s are now things that you do in your mid-30s. Home ownership, not going to happen. And it's a combination of cultural factors, economic factors, but it's completely changing the outlook for lots of my clients about who they're selling to and how they sell and what the right proposition for this group is. It's obviously also creating a lot of headlines about how many avocados we're eating and now why we can't afford the deposit on a house, which is complete nonsense. But fundamentally, that's why there's lots of tension between two generations. And then the final one, which seems appropriate in a room like this to talk about, is still endless conversation about the metaverse. And not the metaverse as promoted by Meta. I have to be nice because they're a client, but it's not going to be all of us in our back rooms in rubber suits. I know that appeals to some of you. It's going to be mixed reality. It's going to be your primary user interface through a pair of glasses or lenses. It's not going to be for everything. It's very hard to replace a keyboard for rich and very, very accurate input. But for lots of low-level daily digital interactions, it's going to be there. And lots of my clients are thinking about, again, zoom in, how it affects them. Local authorities, one local councillor asked me, well, can we put all our signs in the metaverse and save loads of money on street furniture? Really simple question, but once you start to zoom in on the impact, you go, bloody hell. Actually, pavements you can walk down without smacking into a lamppost, potentially. So zoom in, don't just ignore these conversations as if they're sort of big buzzwords. Zoom into what it means for your organisation and think about it. Carve out that 1% of your time think about the pressures and the trends, how they come together, and really, really zoom into your geography, your organisation, your people, your customers. And this is where the plug comes. And if you really want to know how to do it, I've now got a course where I teach all these skills. I used to teach it for thousands of pounds to small groups of executives, and I've now put it all online. And it's a couple of £100, minus 10% for being friends of Apadmi with the code Apadmi23. And you can go and learn all these techniques that I've just talked about online, self-serve in your own time. And that's me.
Oh, how do you follow that? Nice one, Tom. That was brilliant. Thank you. Really inspiring, covered a huge amount. And I think what's really interesting to me and to lots of people in the room is that it's quite easy to think of the future as technology. A lot of the things, most of the things that you spoke about aren't technology. It's not what's the latest thing that we can put into the thing that we're building. It's much bigger than that. So I'm going to start with a really quick... Sorry, let's introduce the panel. Let's take a seat, I think. You have to. So, a quick reminder. Stu Jones, Domino's, Denise, Maskew, TalkTalk, and I'll get it right this time, Phil. Phil Neilson, Head of Emerging Technology and Continual Improvement at Barnardo's. So I'll start with a quick question, one-word answer. Are you doing enough thinking about the future in your organisation? Phil? No. Denise? No. Stu? No. I'd take that as a no. I don't think any of us are, based on what Tom's just said. And I think the next thing that was really resonant as you were speaking, Tom, was there's so much of it. Where do we start and where do we focus and what does it mean? And I think that's the question I'd like to start with. So Phil, what does it, when we use this huge word of future, what does that mean for Barnardo's? When you are spending time on it, where are the things that you're thinking about? What are the...
I think for Barnardo's, we need to apply the context of health and social care around being behind the curve. So
I'm going to...
There we go. Can you hear me now? Yeah. So the context of health and social care being behind the curve from a technology perspective, but also back to Tom's point around the environmental factors. So health and social care being funded by local governments and national government is under pressure from a funding perspective. That pressure is invariably going to push down on providers such as Barnardo's, which puts a different level of constraint on how we can look at the future and what the future holds for us. There's lots of fundamental things that are in the near-term future, so the 18-month view that Tom referred to. So I think for us, it's about knowing that there may well be children's services that sit in the metaverse in many years' time. It's not appropriate today. The technology is not there and it's not available enough for most of the children that we support. But similarly, it's on the horizon. We need to keep an eye on it. Right now, it's about the near-term impact, the next 12, 24 months, where we can really make a difference to the way in which we deliver services. And that's about more traditional hybrid and virtual services that are overlaid on top of our physical services and understanding how they work together. So Barnardo's as an organisation have not had that strategic view. It's been talked about, it's been banded around as something that we need to do, but actually now, the last 12 months or so, we're looking to really focus on exactly what that looks like, get a plan in place, build it into the strategy, which is due towards the end of this year or early next, for the next 3 to 5 year view, to understand exactly what that looks like and really have something tangible in there that will impact the children that we support.
Brilliant. There's going to be time after the panel to ask questions, so if anyone's got anything, scribble it down and ask questions of the panellists in a sec. Denise, would you like to answer the same question? I mean, it's a big one, but what does future mean for TalkTalk?
Well, I think when I was listening to Tom talk, really, from a TalkTalk perspective, and and broadband, and we talk about connecting people, and we have to touch every element of the growth that's coming and the changes that are coming, and we've got to connect people faster, more reliable connections so that people can run their businesses from home. They can be able to support remotely and change the way that they work and the way they communicate. And for us, it's at the moment very much that rollout of faster fibre, that the FTTP. High-speed internet into your home rather than to a cabinet that is half a mile down the street, and really focusing on educating the country on why that's important and what's going to bring to their lives. If you've been watching Netflix and you've got, you're streaming and it's stuttering, it's the most frustrating thing. But when you think about how you might be working or being in an alternative world, that it's learning something online, it's going to be incredibly difficult without that sort of high speed networks that are the government are dedicated to rolling these out across the country up till by 2025. I think it might be a bit longer, in all honesty, but it really needs to happen in order to be able to support all of these things that are coming down the line from a technology view.
Brilliant. So very much an enabler of lots of our futures. Stu?
I think for Domino's, it's a sort of slightly different space that we work in terms of being a trade organisation and really trying to push trade as well. And I think we do two things. We do lots of referencing various points against this time last year or this time last week. It's the nature of working in trade. What's kind of really interesting for us is when we start looking at our future projections. So obviously we do our annual forecast that you mentioned, Tom, and we think about, are we where we should be? We're just in such an ever-changing market. The difficulty we find is trying to find the opportunity to really think further out than that forecast and further out than our kind of retrospective reflection. I think we've got this really good mentality now at trying to get data at the heart of everything that we do. And the reason for that is because if you look at our immediate competitors in the QSR space, and I've worked for a few of them, what we've all got is kind of lots of information, lots of data, lots of usage. Where they're kind of slightly outside of that QSR space, where you've got aggregation services and companies that are doing door-to-door delivery and last-mile delivery very well, they're using data in a different way. And I think we're at the inception point of how we can take that data now and convert our first-party data into a reality for what the future looks like for a Domino's customer. So I'd say the future for us is really trying to make the best use of the data that we've got, first-party data, and translate that into an experience that is tailored to our customers through personalization or through making it hyper-targeted for the customer.
Brilliant. And what about when you're having the conversations, albeit not enough of them? Where are the challenges that you see? Denise, do you want to, what are the sort of blockers or the things that are going to get in the way of your immediate vision of that future?
Immediately, two things spring to mind. Is customer understanding. So when I talk about TalkTalk and on our product, it's why do I need this faster product? Why do I need to have an installation into my house? I don't want that. Why I still want a phone line. How will that affect my future life? Those kinds of things. So a big education program for our customers and everyone, I suppose, in the country. Secondly, something that I'm really focused on is this digital skills shortage that we have, and the lack of even female leaders in technology. We still only have 20% of women working in technology. That has got to change. We've got to show high school girls that future in STEM is appropriate. It's absolutely appropriate that they can do it, and that there are people that they can look up to and aspire to be in these different careers. Every single job now touches on technology in some way, even if you're sat at home building something physical, but you still need Etsy to sell that. You still need email. You still need to be able to do online banking. You still need to be able to promote and market your product and be able to create little videos and lots of different things. So really want to really focus on those personally over the next few years and what we can do to promote technology and as a space for younger children to come into and work in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think Barnardo's, it's two things. I think is appropriateness, because as I described earlier, that actually there are a split of people who actually see the future way beyond the current capabilities or appropriateness for Barnardo's, and there are people that are struggling to understand what the future might look like in the real world future. And the other one is kind of back down to the resource issue. So the vast majority of our internal customer is the Children's Services Operations team, which are constantly under pressure from the services they deliver, doing that on a budget and doing that with the, as we all know, incredibly difficult recruitment conditions that they're in at the moment. So they're all overworked, overtired, actually focusing on delivering care, which they should be, and we're asking them to focus their attention on what it will look like in 2 years' time, and they can't even get past the next 2 days. So those two factors are a real constraint for us. And I think there's, again, back to Tom's point about appropriately talking about what the future looks like, and it's not a 5-year view, it's a 3-year, a 2-year, a 1-year view on what that roadmap to the future really looks like and what's appropriate.
How about Domino? What was the question? The question was, when you're thinking about those future things for your organisation, so for Domino's, and the context in which you're thinking about it, where do you see the blockers or the challenges that are going to get in the way?
I certainly don't think it's related to ambition inside the company at all. I think it's a really ambitious place to work. I don't think it's a limitation on the capacity of people to be able to think about the future either. I think it's more the confidence, and it's what you were talking about before, Tom, in terms of intersections and risk. Are the most forward-thinking companies the ones that lean into risk the most? And that can be in a competitive market space like we're in. I mean, we can all name 5 or 6 big competitors that compete with Domino's and 5 or 6 local competitors that compete with Domino's, and then you get the aggregation services on top of that as well. It's so competitive. So someone puts their head above the parapet. If it's wrong, you can actually find yourself in a really kind of position of kind of, you know, not being able to trade on a kind of competitive basis anymore. So I think it's trying to understand where that opportunity is. And I'm not sure if this is still the case, but R&D used to have the tax relief in the UK if you had R&D departments. And that kind of was a note to say, look, if you carve out the capacity for your company to do this, we want to be a powerhouse in the UK when it comes down to innovation. But there's lots of companies that can't afford to do it. So what does a company do? And I think we at Domino's, we've got some really good product managers with lots of thinking capability and capacity. What we don't want to do is constantly have to lean on the big auditors to tell us what to do next. We want to be able to be in charge of our own destiny. So I think it's about having a kind of understanding about where the capacity sits inside a day-to-day team to think about the future and what they have to do to get that message heard. When I was at ITV, for example, a lot of my team used to say to me, why aren't we doing this? It's such a brilliant idea. And we said, well, we can't really because, you know, we're doing X, Y, and Z. And then Boston Consultancy Group will come in and say, we should do this. And they go, yeah, that's a fantastic thing to do, you know, and could have saved you £28 million if you let us do that first. But so that's why I think it's just having that confidence. And I'd love to think the confidence didn't exist in a big consultancy.
Great answer. Tom, so you as well as NASA and Meta and everybody else, you deal with more normal companies like most of us. Are these common challenges and that you see, the ones that the panel have mentioned, or are there other challenges that you see from companies?
100%. I mean, I think the one about actually almost needing validation from an external third party that this is a good idea is a common one. And some of my favourite clients are the ones who've actually got really good mechanisms in place for ideas from inside the organisation to be surfaced, prototyped, and then rolled out. And I think it is such an incredible innovation practice. If you've built a culture inside the organisation where people are willing to bring those ideas forward, where you've got money, constant supply of, not a lot, but constant supply of money in terms of prototyping and testing those ideas, and then board level commitment to say, if that idea proves, we're going to do it, we'll move in that direction. You know, so you're constantly moving slowly in the right direction, even if you're not making what doesn't look like big leaps forward, you're just constantly moving in the right direction. I think that's really powerful. But yeah, absolutely, you know, all of those challenges are common, and particularly, yeah, people have this idea that small companies are more nimble and more agile, and it's not true. New companies are nimble and agile because they've got no legacy, they've got no baggage, you know, but they're only nimble and agile for probably the first year. You know, as soon as they get into revenue, a lot of that goes, and we're seeing this a lot with the big tech giants now. they're having to restructure themselves to try and restore agility and restore that risk taking. So you really have to work at maintaining it, so maintaining that innovative spirit, maintaining that agility, and often it comes down to the structure of the organisation. And so sometimes the output of my work is, okay, we should go in this direction. More often the output of my work is, we've recognised that we don't really know exactly what's going to happen, or more specifically, we don't know when this trend is going to be realised. And we need to be more agile so that when it does come about, we can leap on it. And that's a really interesting thing to think about. Even if you haven't got the time to sort of constantly see what's next, knowing you've got to be quick to move when it comes.
Excellent. Did much of that resonate with your organisations? I'd love to pass it over to you now, and if there's any questions from anybody in the room, to the panel, to one of the panel, to all of the panel, raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you.
Be brave.
Yep. I'll try and pass it down.
Thanks. This is to Phil, really. So I'm working Citizens of Ice charity. So with charity in the social sector, how do you get buy-in from funders and stakeholders about investing in the future when their priority is investing in the now?
It's a really good question. And so I've been with Barnardo's for 5 months, so I don't know yet, is the honest answer. And it's my first time working with a charity. However, I think the underlying tone of Barnardo's and the senior team at Barnardo's is they know that they need to do it. They just don't know what it is yet. So I think once we've defined and we've established what that future and what that path looks like, I think it will be a relatively open door. I think the real challenge will be the rest of the organisation, because actually that's where the volume is, that's where the masses are, that's where the risk is, and that's also where the change is received. So I think that's probably our biggest challenge. And the organisation's also aware of that, and we're putting some change process in place around some of the larger projects that we're doing at the moment, which is going to kind of evolve and then will become, as we start to look towards the future and do some of those even more changing, impactful projects, that actually there's that change and engagement culture already there. So I think that's probably the kind of two-pronged approach that we'll see happen.
Thank you. I found it really interesting, actually, with sort of the theme of this around technology not necessarily being the future. It's more about the enabling capabilities that technology has and the adoption of those technologies with businesses, etc. And advising sort of digital and tech businesses for about a decade or so, I'm seeing that sector as being very much a adopter of that, an early adopter. So we're seeing other more traditional sectors doing that, really. But one interesting point I just wanted to ask the panel, really, it was mentioned at the start around future planning, around budgets, and then the innovation, the ideas not marrying up with the budgets. That sounds to me more of a mindset and a change at higher level, board level, etc. that needs to change that mindset and that outlook. So just wondered how that sort of marries up with your organisations, really, in terms of the changing culture and the outlook.
It's a really good question. I think if I was sat here maybe in 2013, 2012, I would be saying to our kind of senior leadership team, you've got to be looking at drones, because drones, Amazon Fly is a thing. It's carbon efficient. We can cut down on the cost of the last mile. I would have made a very, very big business case to do that, because I would have been betting on that being where we were today, is deliveries being made in that way. I think then looking back on that and think, I would have been wrong at that point. I wouldn't have considered fly zones over Heathrow or over Birmingham or Manchester. And so I think that kind of, how do you navigate those types of conversations to say it should be something we look into, but not double down on? And I think what is really important is to try and find that common language that resonates inside the business that everyone can galvanise behind as well. And I think one of those really toxic terms is stagnation. And so when you talk about stagnation, and I think, we've got a really good, important message internally, which is to be the Netflix of food, which is sort of symbolising that we don't want to stagnate. And I think we've done a good job of socialising that internally to say that's a future we can galvanise, which isn't necessarily explicit, but also says where we definitely don't want to be, and what we don't want to have happen to is we want to use more data. So I think having that snappy vision, guiding North Star is a way we can all galvanise behind and say, we're having this conversation because of where we don't want to be, as much as where we do want to be. So I think there's a kind of a double edge to that narrative.
Yeah, I feel quite lucky really in that TalkTalk is very much focused on one thing, and it's connecting the nation with really solid, reliable Wi-Fi. And we will set out budget and we will do a strategy that goes often years into the future. And we do look at what's coming down the line, and we work with other companies such as Amazon, such as Netflix and so on. And it's the one thing I would say is, and it goes off your point really, is we wouldn't stagnate in that way, in that we move almost too fast for that. If anything, it's dizzying. We have to change because we have to be able to keep up with what our customers need and want. And if we were to just go, right, this is what we're going to do for the next 18 months, and we just did that, then, we'd get to that end of the 18 months and it wouldn't be the right thing. So we're constantly evolving, but keeping that basis of what it is that we're doing, that North Star. So, quite often there's changes that you think, oh, actually, I thought 18 months ago we would be here, but we're over there. But it's quite often we find it's the right place to have been, and it would have been a mistake. And it is just, but I think it's nice to be that flexible to be able to go, actually, now I know we talked about this a lot, let's do this over here because that's actually the emerging need at this moment in time.
In many ways, it's about the sequence of thought. So, so often in organisations, the rush to, we've got to get the budget done by this date. The driver for the budget is often, okay, we've got to save money over there, and I want sales to do plus 5%, plus 10% this year. And so the budget is literally a copy and paste last year's spreadsheet. Slice a few bits off there, stick a few bits on there. And that process is in train before anybody starts thinking strategically about what are the macro factors. What have we got coming out of R&D? How does that fit into the strategy? What are our new regulatory requirements? And if we really respected foresight, if we really thought, if we were truly strategy-driven organisations, like it sounds like you are, the first thing would be, okay, let's do that foresight piece. What's going to be going on in the world in next year? What's coming out of R&D? What are our competitors doing? What's happening in adjacent markets? Let's pull all that in. Now let's look at the budget in that light and build the budget to support the direction of travel. In 99% of companies, those two processes either happen in parallel or the strategy is written after the budget.
I think, again, I come from a relatively fortunate position of Barnardo's having the foresight of having an innovation department. So we have a team that are doing lots of the things we talked about, not all of them, and certainly not as proactively as we perhaps should. Comes down to a resource challenge as much as anything with a diverse organisation as Barnardo's is. But actually we have an innovation lab that is working through some of those prototypes, some of that thinking, some of that evolution of the children's services largely, and exactly how that will play out. So that again comes down to having the view that there is a future, we're just not sure what it is, and they're starting to invest in exactly figuring out what that is and then investing in making it happen.
We've definitely got time for a couple more questions, so because this gentleman's nearest.
So you both talked, Tom and Denise, you talked about the shortage and the gender inequality of digital skills and talent within the UK. What do you see, if any, sort of technical advances are going to help either mitigate that or reduce it?
The answer is we don't know yet. I mean, the ChatGPT and the future iterations of OpenAI clearly have the potential to do some low-level, if not necessarily potentially high-level coding. I sat down with the chief strategy officer of a big software company about 5 years ago, and he said, we're preparing for a low-code, no-code future. And their products at the time that were going into heavy software development, they were preparing for a kind of return to, and this will only resonate with people of a certain vintage, rewind 20 years, and I was doing the PR for Lotus Notes and Domino. And we had endless case studies of Janet, the project manager of a furniture company in Huddersfield, I've just made Janet up, who'd written an application for Lotus Domino, a custom database-driven application to manage, it was like an early CRM system or something. And, we kind of, he thought we'd be heading back into that sort of environment. I think that's possibly true, but I don't think it's necessarily a very attractive future if you're trying to scale or support. It's very easy to build software these days. It's really hard to support it. So I think we're still going to need an awful lot of humans, and I only see those humans coming from one place, because brilliant as our universities are, they can't produce enough people. Potentially brilliant, albeit too small as our apprenticeship schemes are, they can't produce enough people. The only place we're going to get loads more people with digital skills, and particularly women, is in returners and retraining. And I try and convince, and I fail miserably, but I try and convince all my clients to look internally for those skills before they go anywhere else. Because they're making loads of people in call centres redundant, they're making people, they're automating various bits of the jobs, and all these people who've got years of service, goodwill, smart brains, could potentially be very quickly retrained to do some of this stuff, are disappearing off into the job market, quite often with no other opportunities for them, and then they're spending huge amounts of money which could be spent on training, competing for a declining pool of people. There's a bit more liquidity in that market now with some of the layoffs, but you've got to be turning your attention internally to try and rebalance and find those skills.
Absolutely, and you just reminded me that. But I built my first ever intranet on Lotus Notes, and I'm having horrible flashbacks. I couldn't agree more with all of that. We have got apprenticeship schemes, we've got Kickstarter, we work with UA92 who are doing incredible things in this space as well, and there just isn't enough. We have a women in tech community within TalkTalk, and this is a big topic that we've been talking the last few weeks about, is how can we do more to encourage the people who work in our call centres, who work in other areas of TalkTalk, to consider a role and a move over in technology. And that could be anything, that could be from, it could be project management right through to software engineering. So it's, and there's some brilliant examples that are coming out that we are, trying to sort of focus on, and we're telling people's career stories and really trying to see, none of us have come from a place of, this has all been handed to us, and lots of people have had squiggly careers and got there in the end. Tech Returners is a brilliant, and there's a Tech Returners organisation in Manchester run by Becky, and she's incredible force in this space about encouraging women who have left the world of work for whatever reason to return back into tech roles. Say, like, I'm a mum, I can do 5 things at once, I might not do all of them brilliantly, but there is definitely a market for getting women who have come out of the working life and back into their careers, into technology, and using those other skills that they've got and training them to be able to fill the current skills gap that we have, and then working with schools, universities to make sure that this doesn't remain a problem. We really have to sort that out at a very young age.
I think at Barnardo's we have a very, very strong focus on EDI, and that's played out. So one of the teams that I'm responsible for is our online platforms team, and we're doing a lot of the things that we've talked about here, where we're taking people from across the organisation and bringing them into that team and upskilling them, and effectively growing their skill set within the organisation. I think the transition across my 2 halves of my career from health and social care and into a more tech focused. I was talking to an ex-colleague just earlier this week who has lost faith in health and social care and the role that she had there, and she's stepped away from it and is now doing training to become a coding engineer. So I think there's lots and lots of opportunity for exactly what we've discussed here, and it's happening right now. So I think harnessing that wherever we sit is particularly important.
Just a very quick point on that as well. So it is about obviously what the panel have said about hiring internally, but we use Apadmi. So Apadmi are our app development agency. It's so important to find an agency that have the same shared values, and lots of people will say they do. It's really important to do that due diligence to go in, and Apadmi absolutely are that agency. They kind of help support and grow the community they're in. They help and grow our application, and I think they do a lot for Manchester, and I think for the tech space as well. So I think it's as important to look for the right partner as it is to make sure you retain your internal staff as well. And if you use Stu20, you get 10% off Apadmi today.
He's making us blush. Thank you. We will have one more question. We should end there, but I promised one more question. So one more from the back.
Thank you. Thanks. Hi. You've talked quite a lot about what's coming in the future. Sorry. You've talked a lot about what's coming in the future and the trends that are up and coming. So what's the best way to keep at the forefront of trends, and what resources do you use to keep on top of what's coming next?
You have to be really mercenary and really ruthless. You can't try to sort of drink the ocean, because there's so much going on. You have to really, really focus through the lens of time. What time frame am I looking at? Where these can have impact. Geography. Are these going to touch me here where I am? And my domain. Are they going to touch actually my organisation? I have no idea what's going on generally, other than through the lens of the last project that I've done. And what I find is there's a lot of commonality between projects, but I don't try and sort of stay abreast of everything. I really zoom in on what's directly relevant to my organisation. Now, you can't do that by only reading your industry newsletters, because they're probably not going to cover it, but use that rule of adjacency. What looks a bit like me, what companies might come into my space, what's going on in my industry in other countries, and use that as a sort of search narrowing for what might affect me. There's lots of general stuff, there's lots of fun stuff. Just read and listen to lots of podcasts and read New Scientists and stuff like that. But that's the way to zoom in, be really ruthless about it.
Unless any of you guys have got a hot tip on where to go for your future. Well, I was going to say that. There's books and a podcast. Tom's modestly not mentioned. He's got his own podcast, so check that out. Thank you so much. We're going to call it a day. There's plenty of refreshments next door. Hopefully none of you lot are leaving, so we can continue conversations around there. I just want to say thank you to everybody for your time and for turning up, and especially to everyone here. I think there's three things took out of it. Context is everything. You can't drink the ocean, as Tom just said. Find what future means for your organisation. And then the other two, commitment and culture. You've got to allocate some time to it, and you've got to create a culture of people who do it. If there's a fourth, it would be to say thanks again to Tom, and it's the fourth C is get on his course. Thank you all.